while we're on the subject of wheels, you'll remember that a few episodes ago we sent the wee 14-inch Bridgestone T's away to get overhauled. Well, quick status update, they have been overhauled. These are now in impressive gold, if I'm being honest, because it is the closest colour that's going to work with what I want. As you can imagine, we've done black, we're going gold for the wheels. There's maybe some slight JPS colour schemes here, but it's not going to be fully like that, but yes, black and gold. First up, you remember that these take mad old wild sort of screw-in valves. We discussed this before. So I ordered replacement mad screw-in valves and I thought, well, that's quite good. You can get different mad screw-in valves, one with shorter heads. Stumpy boys that look a bit like that. Except that you don't, because the stumpy boys are still too wide to go through the f***ing hole and therefore are completely and utter uselessness. So therefore I have ordered the exact ones that I need with a 6mm hole, not an 8mm hole, and until I get that on I can actually do nothing with the tyres. So in an effort to clear up some space, I thought I'll just mount the wheels on anyway. For example, with an unbeaded tyre here that I can sneak in the back door of and get a wee valve in, and that looks lovely and fantastic. However, when I try the same lark in the back, you'll notice scrubbing. Well, actually, you'll notice numerous amounts of scrubbing on these. The paint on these are terrible, right? It's not going to stop them working. I'm not even bothering with the orange. We'll get back to this once the car runs. But it's scuffed off the top. Why? Because the 14s don't fit the backs. Now, stop and have a wee think about this for a second. The fronts are bolted up and spin. Why wouldn't they fit the backs? Well, remember there was a big song and a dance I made about this, that I wanted the SVT, i.e. the biggest brakes that ever came on an MX-5. That means 280mm discs in the front. It also means 281mm discs on the back. Now don't ask me why Mazda made this decision. The backs are obviously not vented like the fronts are, but they are slightly taller. And the consequence of that is the calipers actually sit further up, closer to the wheel on the back than they do in the front. Obviously I've checked the fronts and went, well, there's no hope in hell that the back's going to be bigger. I didn't verify the wheels fit in the back. So naturally they don't. The solution here, as you can see, is I've put the old shorter carrier for the 250mm and we'll get the other discs on and we'll just deal with that with a bit of shot blasting, but it's just another thing. But crucially, it's another thing because I didn't put wheels specifically on my finalisation list. Actually, because I'm a complete penis and I got the things rolled wrong. Welcome back to Tools and Track. We are getting a fair old tick list going on here, but today we need to put one thing that became another thing properly off the list, and that is fuel supply. Why does this need to be a whole thing? To understand that, we need to go right back to the start. What is a fuel supply? Welcome to more of my art. This is, in the most simplistic term, what a normal car's fuel injection system looks like. Here's your fuel tank. We couldn't afford a full one, so you've got a pickup here, just a tube with probably some form of gauze over it, from which a pump will suck up and generate an amount of fuel pressure, usually about 5 bar, 4 bar tops, don't know, depends on the pump. And that will send fuel all the way down this line to a filter, because as most classic car guys know, crap can generate in here and you don't want it generating there, because once it goes from the filter, it goes into the fuel rail, which will be this guy here, and 4 injectors controlled by an ECU will dribble fuel into an engine at a considerable amount of pressure. That pressure, however, must vary, and that variance is performed by the regulator. That regulator, you'll notice, will always have a vacuum line on it, and that vacuum line goes to the inlet manifold and actually ups and downs the fuel pressure by resisting against the tank, depending on how much is needed. When you're in wide open throttle, you'll probably need 3.5 bar, but in closed throttle, when there's vacuum, you'll probably need a little less, so it drops down. That is what the regulator does. All the stuff that doesn't need goes straight back into the tank. Simple? Yeah, it is quite simple. So why did it all go wrong with the MX-5? Well, this is how Mazda used to do it, or still do it. I don't know, this was up to the Mark II, whatever the Mark III and Mark IV boys need, I don't care, because I don't have one. Anyway, you've got the tank, same as before, fuel pump lives in the tank, and then it goes up to a regulator here, and that regulator will generate about 4 bar, and anything it doesn't need, it just dumps straight back into the tank. It's actually a really simple system, and it means there's nothing but 4 bar of fuel pressure going through a filter, up to the injectors, and then at the end you've got a damper, i.e. something just to help control and regulate that without returning anything to the tank. Ergo, returnless, or as some folk call it, a deadhead system. The problem with this though is, all of that module is actually a bolt-in thing on the MX-5's tank. So it's a whole assembly that you need to put in and take out. Now, I didn't take that the first time because I thought, oh, it's going to be much easier for me to just take that damper off and put a return line in. And it worked. The first time I started this car, that was the system I used, apart from one little thing I forgot, that. I was just running a constant pump level of fuel pressure here with no real control for opening and closing the throttle. So when I was sitting on idle, it was rich. When I opened the throttle, it went lean, and I couldn't work out why. That was why. So the next iteration we're going to have an adjustable fuel pressure regulator involved in this, but I'm still going to keep this returnless system. The reason being this section here. Remember, I've got a really tight transmission tunnel and I've run one fuel line in already. For me to put another line back and have it safe looking for the IVA, I'm going to need to repeat all that process. And I'm pretty tight in space as it is. If I can just keep that one line for the moment, it's going to do me a lot of favours. So how do I replicate this whole assembly and make it work? We do this. Basically exactly the same as what we had before, but instead of having a return here, we block that off and we put a bleed fuel pressure regulator here. So bear in mind, whatever happens before the fuel pressure regulator will be its regulation. Whether it sits here, it will build up all the fuel pressure before it, or whether it sits there, it will make all of the things before it have fuel pressure. All we need to do is take the dump and put it back into the tank. So the alternator situation is as follows. The good news is we actually can get it all fitted again, which is, you know, nice, because I'm pretty sure I've made this, and everything else in separate situations. And as we have learned so far, that does not always mean that they'll fit together. But whilst they do fit, the big issue I had, namely the fear about this brake pipe, has been somewhat eluded by manipulating the brake pipe so it's no longer sitting kind of up the length of there, and instead kind of heads it the way here. So that's fine. However, what we now have is the pipe touches the adjuster for the alternator bracket, but that'll be okay, because if we make a bracket up to not just support the pipe but also give her a little kink on the way down, that kink will actually clear that. So rubber insulation between the two, probably a large substantial O-ring, some form of clamp, and that should be the end of that. So here's a little side quest. We've got our Honda Radiator at the front. I'm just waiting on one hose arriving before that's now finally buttoned up and ready to hold coolant. However, the design of this radiator has this wee guy here. Now that's an expansion port. It's not actually going to be pressurised, but it will need to hold water should the radiator cap ever expand and contract. So water has to flow through that. Now, as luck would have it, there are many off-the-shelf solutions to this, and I found the most subtle but still fundamentally quality option rather than plastic. This is an alloy thing. Anyway, what I need to do is find somewhere nice and sensible to mount this without it causing me problems with something else that needs to be in the place where it's going to go down the line. So yeah, I'm just going to guess. So 15 minutes into an episode about plumbing and fuel systems, and we're now plumbing and fuel systems. So what I've managed to do, we've got a line running from underneath the tank, and that goes to a filter, obviously. Then from the filter we go into the fuel pump. Now, I have took a bit of excess to kind of curve around and give us a bit of a buffer here. I don't think it's going to solve a fuel surge issue, but it just gives me a bit of a head of fuel in there so that the pump doesn't run dry for prolonged periods of time. If I'm going to get fuel surge issues, and yes, I know guys have pointed out that, you know, putting some form of baffle in the tank would help. I don't want to butcher this tank any more than I've already done. If we find that's going to be a problem in cornering, I will put a surge tank in. We have the space, we have the technology. But what I'm now going to do is, from the pump, we need to look at how to deadhead this system. So I'm going to run a pipe out from here and I'm going to run it into this. So this is going to be pump line in, and then this will be fuel line straight out and into that feed to the engine. So my takeoff here is going to run up the side of the tank and then into this, my fuel pressure regulator. Pretty much like that, and then this will bleed off into the pipe fitting that we put on the top of the tank, thus completing the fuel pressure system. So, shall we crack on? Well, almost, because the only thing that's missing here is fuel hose. And it's the only thing that's been delivered by, you guessed it, fucking Every. As a side note, the last bit of fuel line that I did have to play with was just a foot long, and that's actually been perfect to take from the front of the line up under the inlet manifold and into a little plastic fitting that connects onto the original line. Now, the original line is obviously 8mm, we could have put a wee Jubilee clip over it, but I'd prefer to A, use this 90-degree fitting because, well, it puts the fuel line in the right direction, and B, well, there's no barb in the end of these lines when they're quick release, so it's just a risk. So I wanted to put the proper fitting on and use a barbed end on that to run into the fuel line. So hopefully that won't burst. So our fuel system is actually in. Unfortunately, I have no way of testing it because we don't have any power to it. As a result, quite clearly the next thing we're going to do off of the list is going to be loom. So that's to come in another episode, probably the next one. However, I'm stopping a wee bit early because I need to have a wee discussion. All the people that are still tuned in by now are the people who are obviously watching the whole videos and will be affected by this. Everyone else, well, catch you. I'll skip straight to the point. The adverts are going back on. Now, there's a reason for this. Crucially, I'm losing the growth on this channel. There's a clear degradation in the amount of new subscribers, the watch time's going down, it's all the analytics are just dying. The reason for this, I'm pretty sure, is that YouTube have decided, because I've not got ads on, that they're going to get no revenue out of me and therefore are completely throttling the channel. So the concession I'm going to make, if you're on patreon.com/toolsandtrack, you will still not get ads right up until the day it airs on YouTube because, you know, you guys pay for it. So obviously I will make sure that it's ad free. Even for those who aren't paying for it, it'll be an ad at the start, an ad at the end. I'm not interrupting the middle of my content with an advert because that is just horrific. I don't like it when other people do it. We won't do it here. But fundamentally, I think the only way the channel's going to come back is if we have to turn them on. So apologies for that. But, you know, if you do feel like helping and fighting that, do the sub, do the share, do the like thing. That would be grand. And until next weekend, guys, drive safe.